She was already late. Not fashionably late. Not the kind of late you could laugh off with a smile and a quick apology. She was the kind of late that meant something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. And every second she spent standing on that sidewalk, mud dripping from her fingertips onto the pristine concrete, was another second the man inside that restaurant was checking his watch and deciding she wasn't worth it. Diane Carter looked down at herself. The dress, the deep burgundy wrap dress she had ironed twice, the one her sister had called gorgeous when she'd sent the photo that morning, was destroyed, not wrinkled, not stained. Destroyed. Brown mud covered her from her collarbone to the hem, soaked through the fabric and into her skin. Her natural hair, which she had spent 2 hours twisting and pinning into a soft updo, had collapsed entirely, hanging around her face in damp, dirt-laced coils. One of her heels was missing. She was standing on one bare foot on the sidewalk outside the most expensive restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina, at 7:07 on a Friday evening, holding a broken shoe in her left hand. She looked like a woman who had lost a war. And yet? She pushed open the door. The lobby of Clement's, the kind of restaurant where the napkins cost more to launder than most people's grocery bills, fell silent the moment Diane stepped inside. Not the polite pause of distraction, the total airless silence of collective shock. A woman near the hostess stand actually took a step backward. The pianist in the corner missed a note. 2 waiters exchanged a look that communicated volumes in half a second, and Diane felt every single stare like a physical thing pressing against her chest. She lifted her chin anyway. "Don't you dare cry," she told herself. "Not here, not yet." "I have a reservation," she said quietly to the hostess, whose expression had frozen somewhere between professional courtesy and genuine alarm. "Table for 2, Carter, 7 o'clock. The hostess opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Miss Carter, perhaps tonight might not be the best." "Diane." The voice came from behind her, deep, controlled. The kind of voice that was accustomed to rooms going quiet when it spoke, and had long since stopped finding that remarkable. Diane turned slowly. Cole Whitfield looked exactly like his photographs, which, given that this was a blind date arranged by her co-worker Patricia, she had studied with perhaps more attention than she'd like to admit. Tall, lean, early 40s, with dark hair silvering at the temples and sharp hazel eyes that currently held an expression she could not quite read. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that had probably cost more than her monthly rent, and he was standing at the edge of the dining room with his phone in his hand and his jaw set in a hard, careful line. His eyes travelled over her once, slowly, from her bare, muddy foot, up her destroyed dress, to her wrecked hair, to the broken heel dangling from her hand. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Then Cole Whitfield took one deliberate step backward. "I think," he said quietly, "that there's been some kind of misunderstanding." And that was the moment Diane Carter made a decision. She could leave, or she could turn around, walk back out through those glass doors into the Charleston evening, call a rideshare with her mud-caked phone, and spend the rest of the night on her bathroom floor trying to figure out how everything had gone so catastrophically sideways. She could let this be the story she told her sister with a laugh 3 years from now. The blind date disaster, the one that never even started. Or she could stay and tell the truth. She took one step toward him. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. "Just 5. And if after 5 minutes you still want to leave, I will walk out that door myself and never bother you again. But please, just 5 minutes." Something crossed Cole Whitfield's face. A flicker of something she couldn't name. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he slid his phone into his jacket pocket. 5 minutes, he said. There's a private lounge off the entrance. We're not going into the dining room. It was not gracious. It was not warm. But it was 5 minutes, and Diane would take it. The private lounge was small and quiet. 2 leather chairs, a low table, soft amber lighting that felt almost cruel in its elegance, given the state of Diane's appearance. She sat on the edge of the chair, conscious of the mud still drying on her arms, and folded her hands in her lap so they would stop shaking. Cole sat across from her. He leaned back slightly, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral. He was giving nothing away. 4 minutes and 40 seconds, he said. Diane exhaled. I was early, she began. I want you to know that first, because it matters. I left my apartment at 5:30 for a 7 o'clock reservation. I had a full hour and a half. I was wearing a different dress, a blue one, and my hair was done, and I had both shoes. She paused. I was actually nervous about being too early. Cole said nothing, but his eyes didn't leave her face. I was walking down Magnolia Street, the route I mapped because it's the most direct from the parking garage, and I passed Hargrove Park. You know the section near the east entrance where they've been doing the drainage renovation? The whole area has been cordoned off for weeks because of the excavation work. She watched his face for recognition. The slightest nod told her he knew it. The rain last week flooded the excavation basin. The construction crew had fenced it off, but part of the temporary fencing had come loose. And somehow, I don't know if she was chasing something. I don't know if she just didn't see it. A little girl had gone through the gap. Cole's arms shifted slightly. Just slightly. She was in the water, Diane said, her voice dropping. The basin was maybe 10 feet deep, and it was filled with runoff water and construction mud, and it was cold. Cold. It was so cold you could see it on her face. She was maybe 4 years old, and she was screaming for her mother, and the mud was pulling her down like quicksand, and she couldn't. Diane stopped, pressed her lips together. She couldn't get out by herself. The silence in the lounge changed quality. People were gathered at the fence, Diane continued, steadier now. Everyone had their phones out. Someone was on with 911. A man was shouting that the fire department was 4 minutes away. 4 minutes. She looked directly at Cole Whitfield. A 4-year-old child, Cole, in freezing muddy water. 4 minutes is a very long time. Cole said nothing. So I went in. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Cole Whitfield stared at her. Diane met his gaze without flinching. I didn't think about the dress, she said quietly. I didn't think about my hair or my shoes or this date or what you would think or any of it. I heard her screaming and I looked at the water and I thought, someone has to go in. And I was closest to the gap in the fence, and so... She opened her hands in her lap. So I went in. A muscle worked in Cole's jaw. The mud was worse than I expected, Diane said. I got down to the basin floor and it came up past my knees immediately. You couldn't move quickly. Every step felt like the ground was trying to keep you. The little girl, her name is Maya Okafor. She's 4 years old, and she has these tiny little braids with pink beads at the ends. She had stopped screaming by the time I reached her, because she was too tired to scream anymore, and that scared me more than the screaming had. Diane's voice broke slightly on the last word. She took a breath. I picked her up and I held her above the water, and I told her to hold on. Just hold on. And I held her there until a firefighter came down a rescue rope and took her from my arms. Cole Whitfield had uncrossed his arms. She hadn't noticed exactly when it had happened. But they were uncrossed now, resting on his knees, and he was leaning slightly forward, and the careful neutral expression on his face had cracked open into something raw and unguarded. By the time they pulled me out, Diane said, It was 6:47. I had 13 minutes. I thought about going home. I live 25 minutes away. And I thought about calling to reschedule, but I didn't have your number, only Patricia's. And I thought about just not coming at all. And then I thought... She paused, choosing her words carefully. I thought about you, sitting in there, waiting, wondering if you'd been forgotten. And I couldn't do that to another person. I couldn't. So I came, looking like this. She glanced down at herself, a soft, sad, almost smile crossing her face. Looking exactly like this. The quiet that followed was the longest of the evening. Cole Whitfield looked at Diane Carter. Really looked at her, just the way you look at something when you're trying to understand it fully. And for a moment, his face held an expression that she could not name and would not forget. Maya, he said quietly, is she all right? Diane felt something loosen in her chest. She's all right, she said softly. Cold and frightened, and her mother hasn't put her down since they reunited. But she's all right. The paramedics cleared her. She's going to be completely fine. Cole nodded slowly. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Yes. When you went through that fence, when you decided to go into that water, did any part of you hesitate? Diane thought about it, truly thought about it, the way the question deserved. Yes, she said honestly. For about 2 seconds, I thought, this dress cost me $200. And then Maya went under for a half second and came back up screaming. And after that, I didn't think about anything except getting to her. Cole closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had shifted in his hazel gaze. Something had moved, or settled, or arrived. She couldn't tell which. My car is outside, he said. My apartment is 8 minutes from here. It has a guest room with clean clothes that my housekeeper keeps stocked for visitors, and a shower that you are going to want to stand in for approximately 20 minutes, and a kitchen with more food in it than I can eat alone. He stood up slowly. And after that, if you're willing, I would very much like to take you to dinner. Not here. Somewhere less formal. Somewhere that feels more like the conversation we're about to have. Diane stared at him. You believe me, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I believe you, Cole said. And then, with a quietness that made the words hit twice as hard, and I think you might be the most extraordinary person I've been in a room with in a very long time. Before we go further, we want to ask you something. If you had been in Diane's position, running late, covered in mud, your whole first impression already destroyed, would you have walked through that door anyway? Or would you have turned around and gone home? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. Cole Whitfield's car was a sleek, dark vehicle with leather seats that Diane was deeply concerned about ruining. She said so as she slid inside, and Cole looked at her with an expression that was almost amused. The seats can be cleaned, he said. Sit down, Diane. She sat. The city moved past the windows in soft evening light. Charleston's familiar beauty, the old buildings and flowering trees, the amber glow of street lamps along the waterfront. Diane had lived here for 6 years and still found it beautiful, though she usually had more capacity to appreciate it than she did right now, sitting in a stranger's car in a ruined dress with dried mud cracking on her forearms. Tell me about her, Cole said quietly, as the car moved through traffic. Diane looked at him. Maya. Maya. So Diane told him. She described arriving at the park, the way the ordinary evening had fractured without warning into something terrifying, the sound of crying that reached her before she could even see the source. The crowd gathered at the fence, a ring of helpless witnesses, phones raised. the small dark shape in the water below, barely visible in the deepening evening light. Cole listened the way very few people actually listened, without waiting for his turn to speak, without formulating a response while she was still talking. Just listening, his eyes forward on the road, his hands relaxed in his lap, giving her words room to breathe. The worst moment, Diane said, wasn't going in. Going in was actually the easy part. It felt like the only option, so there was nothing to decide. The worst moment was when I reached her and I picked her up and I felt how cold she was. She stopped. Children are supposed to be warm. They always are. They run hot. You know how kids are. And Maya was cold. Her skin was cold. And I remember thinking, please, 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 just this sort of wordless, constant prayer the entire time I was holding her above that water. Cole's jaw tightened. She talked to me, Diane added softly. While I was holding her, waiting for the rescue team, she talked the whole time. She told me her name. I hadn't asked, she just volunteered it. My name is Maya and I'm 4. And then she told me she had a cat named Biscuit. Diane smiled despite herself. A cat named Biscuit. Cole made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. Kids. Kids, Diane agreed. They were quiet for a moment, and it was the comfortable kind of quiet, the kind that has space in it rather than absence. Can I ask you something? Diane said. Go ahead. When you first saw me walk in, what were you thinking? Honestly. Cole was quiet for several seconds, considering, she realized, not deflecting, actually considering how to answer truthfully. I was thinking, he said slowly, that whatever this was, I wanted no part of it. I was thinking about how to exit quickly and politely and never speak of it again. He paused. And then you said give me 5 minutes, and something about the way you said it stopped me. What about it? You weren't begging, he said. Most people in that situation would have been mortified, would have been falling over themselves apologizing, maybe crying, definitely groveling. You were embarrassed, I could see that, but you weren't ashamed. You stood there in that lobby looking like, well, looking exactly like you did. And you asked for 5 minutes like it was a reasonable request, like you knew the 5 minutes would be worth it. He glanced at her sideways. That takes a particular kind of self-possession. I wasn't expecting it. Diane absorbed this. For what it's worth, she said, I was absolutely terrified. I know, Cole said. That's what made it impressive. The apartment was on the 14th floor of a restored historic building near the Battery, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Charleston Harbor. Diane stood in the entrance and tried not to visibly react to the view. The harbor shimmering in the dark, the lights of the bridge in the distance, the city spread out like something from a painting. It's beautiful, she said, before she could stop herself. It's home, Cole said. And something in the way he said it was more complicated than the words themselves, as the guest bathroom was larger than Diane's living room, stocked with towels that felt like clouds and products that probably cost more than her electric bill. Cole showed her to it with a quiet efficiency and told her the guest wardrobe was in the closet beside the door. His housekeeper kept it stocked in various sizes, apparently a standing arrangement he'd set up years ago for guests who needed it. Take your time, he said at the door. I mean that. As long as you need. Left alone, Diane turned on the shower and stood under it for a long time. The mud washed away in long brown rivulets that circled the drain and disappeared. As the hot water hit her shoulders, Diane felt the full weight of the evening settle over her. The shock and the adrenaline and the cold of the basin water and the terror of Maya's limp cold skin and the impossible surreal comedy of walking into Clement's looking like something that had lost a battle with the earth itself. She pressed her forehead against the cool tile and breathed. Maya is okay, she reminded herself. Maya is okay, and her mother has her, and she has a cat named Biscuit, and she is okay. Everything else could be sorted. She emerged 20 minutes later in a soft, dove-grey dress from the guest wardrobe that fit as if it had been waiting for her. Her hair towel-dried and pulled back simply, the mud and the disaster of the evening washed away. When she found Cole in the kitchen, he had also changed into dark jeans and a white linen shirt, on somehow more disarming in casual clothes than in the suit. He looked up, and something moved briefly across his face before his expression settled back into composure. "Better?" he asked. "Considerably," she said. He had laid out food on the kitchen island. Not a formal setup, nothing like the restaurant they hadn't eaten at. Cheese and bread and fruit, a pasta dish keeping warm on the stove, 2 glasses of red wine already poured. It was the kind of spread that said, "I wanted you to feel comfortable without saying it out loud." "I didn't know what you liked," he said, moving to the stove. "So I made what I know, which is not impressive. But it's decent." "You cooked." "Pasta is barely cooking," he said. "Don't give me credit I haven't earned." They settled at the kitchen island, and the conversation that followed was different. The formality of the evening, the restaurant and the suits and the social performance of a first date, had been entirely stripped away by mud and crisis and a 4-year-old girl named Maya. What was left was 2 people talking honestly over pasta in a kitchen, and it turned out that was significantly better. Diane learned that Cole Whitfield was 43 and had been running Whitfield Capital for 11 years, that he had grown up in Columbia, South Carolina, the son of a high school history teacher and a woman who ran a small alterations shop on Main Street, and that his wealth was entirely self-made, a fact he stated without pride and without false modesty, just as information, part of the record. She learned that he'd been married once, briefly, in his early 30s, and that it had ended without drama or bitterness, but with the quiet sadness of 2 people who had genuinely cared for each other and genuinely been wrong for each other in equal measure. She learned that he had been on exactly 3 blind dates in his entire life, that all 3 had been arranged by the same well-meaning colleague, and that the previous 2 had been perfectly pleasant and utterly forgettable evenings that had produced no second dates and no regrets. "And now this one," Diane said. "And now this one," Cole agreed. And the way he looked at her when he said it made something warm move through her chest. She told him about herself in return, her work as an early childhood education specialist for the Charleston County School District, the work she loved, and the system that perpetually exhausted her, and the daily reality of fighting for resources for children who needed them more than anyone understood or funded. She told him about her family, her younger sister Joanna, who was the loud one, and her mother, who was the louder one, and her father, who had died 5 years ago, and whom she still occasionally turned to call before remembering. She told him about the apartment she'd lived in for 4 years in the Cannonboro neighborhood, the garden she tried to keep on the back patio, the fact that she was a genuinely terrible cook despite multiple genuine efforts to improve. Cole listened to all of it, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, Diane realized something that surprised her. She liked him, not in the performed way you talk yourself into liking someone because you're supposed to on a date. She actually genuinely liked him. He was dry and careful, and occasionally unexpectedly funny, and he asked follow-up questions, and he remembered details she'd mentioned 20 minutes earlier and brought them back naturally in conversation. He was paying attention in the way that mattered. "The kids you work with," Cole said, refilling her wine glass, "the ones in the highest need schools. What's the single biggest thing they're missing? Not systemically, individually. What's the one thing that, if you could give them anything, you'd give them?" Diane didn't hesitate. Time, she said. Adult time. Sustained, consistent, present adult attention. Every study confirms it. The most significant predictor of long-term outcomes for kids in under-resourced environments is the presence of at least one reliable, attentive adult. And we have 30 children to one teacher in some of these classrooms, and parents working 2 jobs, and grandparents raising children because the parents can't. She caught herself. Sorry, I spiral. Don't apologize, Cole said. Keep going. She looked at him. You actually want me to? I actually want you to. So she did. She told him about the mentorship gap in the district, the programs that existed on paper and functioned poorly in practice, the volunteer numbers that looked impressive and revealed on closer examination to be almost entirely front-loaded in wealthier schools. She told him about the research she'd spent 2 years compiling on what sustained mentorship intervention would require to function properly, and the budget model she'd built and submitted 3 times to the district, and 3 times watched disappear into bureaucratic silence. Cole listened to all of it with the focused stillness she was beginning to recognize as his version of absorption. You built a budget model, he said. I did. From scratch? With help from a friend who works in non-profit finance, yes. And the district buried it 3 times. 3 times, Diane confirmed, with the particular weariness of someone who has been disappointed enough times to be unsurprised by it. Cole was quiet for a moment, looking at his wine glass. What would it take to run it independently, he said. Outside the district, a standalone program. What would the first year cost? Diane stared at him. I have the numbers, she said slowly. I built it out for an independent model too, or as an alternative. But the funding requirement is… Diane. His voice was quiet and direct. What would the first year cost? She told him. He nodded once, as if she'd confirmed something he already suspected. Send me the model, he said. I want to read it. Cole, I'm not promising anything tonight, he said, holding up a hand. I'm telling you I want to read it, and that it's not a polite dismissal. I am actually interested. He paused. I've been looking for something to do with capital that means something beyond the next quarterly return, something that lasts. I've been looking for a while. He looked at her directly. I wasn't expecting to find a lead on it over pasta in my kitchen after a rescue operation, but here we are. Diane laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. And it sounded different in this kitchen than she was accustomed to hearing herself laugh. Lighter, somehow. Here we are, she agreed. The evening stretched past 10, past 11. Neither of them seemed to notice the time particularly. They moved from the kitchen to the living area, to the wide window seat that overlooked the harbour, talking the way people talk when they've stopped performing and started actually being present. At some point, she couldn't have said when, the conversation quieted, and they were simply sitting side by side at the window, looking out at the water. And Diane thought about how singular and strange the evening had been. She had started it standing in mud, pulling a small child out of dark water. She was ending it here, in this warm room with this unexpectedly real man, something that felt very much like the beginning of something breathing quietly between them. Can I tell you something? Cole said. Yes. I almost didn't come tonight. He said it to the window rather than to her, as if the confession needed somewhere to go that wasn't quite a face. Patricia has set me up 3 times, as I mentioned, and each time I've shown up and been entirely present and done everything right and gone home alone and felt exactly the same as I had felt before. And this morning I thought, why are you doing this to yourself again? And I almost called Patricia to cancel. He paused. I'm glad I didn't. Diane was quiet for a moment. I almost didn't come either, she said softly. After I got out of that basin, and I was standing on the sidewalk looking like... She gestured vaguely at her general disaster. I thought, as there is no version of this where that man does not immediately regret agreeing to this date. And then I thought about you waiting, and I couldn't make myself turn around. Cole turned to look at her then. You kept showing up, he said. You showed up to pull Maya out of the water when you didn't have to. You showed up to this dinner when every reasonable argument was against it. You keep showing up, Diane. She met his eyes. It's the only thing I know how to do, she said, honestly. The silence that settled between them after that was the softest thing that had happened all evening. Cole reached over and covered her hand with his. A simple, unhurried gesture, nothing rushed or pressured in it. Just his hand over hers, warm and certain, as if it was exactly where it had decided to be. I want to see you again, he said quietly. Not to be polite, not because tonight has been extraordinary, although it has, because I think you are the kind of person it would be a genuine loss to know only once. Diane looked down at their hands. She thought about the morning, the blue dress hanging on the back of her bathroom door, the careful hope of getting ready, the completely ordinary way this evening had started before it became something she would spend the rest of her life telling people about. She thought about Maya's cold skin and the wordless prayer and the pink beads at the ends of tiny braids. She thought about mud on marble floors and a hostess's horrified expression and a man in a charcoal suit taking one step backward. She thought about how the best things she had ever stumbled into had never arrived looking the way she expected. I want that too, she said. Cole's hand tightened gently over hers. Outside, Charleston Harbor shimmered in the dark, patient and ancient and entirely unbothered by the small, extraordinary things happening on its edges. The way it always had been, the way it always would be. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, Diane's phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She was in the middle of a parent-teacher conference, and the timing was terrible. But something made her pick up. Ms. Carter. The voice was a woman's, warm, slightly breathless. This is Adaeze Okafor, Maya's mother. Diane's hand tightened on the phone. I've been trying to find you since that night, Adaeze said. The paramedics couldn't give me your information, and I've been asking everyone. The construction company, the city, anyone who might know. I just wanted... Her voice broke slightly. I just wanted to say thank you, in person, properly, because thank you doesn't feel like a big enough thing to say to someone who saved your child's life. But it's all I have, and I want you to hear it. Diane had to sit down. Maya is wonderful, Adaeze continued, her voice steadying. She is completely fine. She doesn't even seem to remember being frightened. She just wants to tell everyone about the lady who came to get her. She calls you the Mud Lady. A watery laugh. She says it with enormous respect, I promise you. Diane laughed and cried at the same time, which she was fairly certain she had never done before. She told Adaeze it was enough. That hearing Maya was well was more than enough, that she was glad she had been there. When she hung up, she sat for a long moment in the quiet of the empty classroom and felt something settle in her chest, like the last piece of something finding its place. That evening she told Cole about the call over dinner. They had fallen into a rhythm of dinners, easy and regular and increasingly essential, and watched his face move through something complicated and quiet. You saved her life, he said, and then a month later, her mother tracked you down across an entire city just to make sure you knew. Yes, Diane said. Cole looked at her for a long moment. I need you to know something, he said. What? That night, the first night at Clement's, when you walked in and I took that step backward. He shook his head slightly. I've thought about that step every day since, about how close I came to missing this, about what kind of person I would have been if I'd taken one more step and called my driver. His voice was low and careful. I don't want to be that person. I want to be someone who gives people their 5 minutes. Diane reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The same gesture he had made that first night at the window returned now, warm and certain. You did give me my 5 minutes, she reminded him gently. Barely, he said. Barely still counts, she said. Barely is enough to start. He turned his hand over under hers and held it. The mentorship program, he said after a moment. My legal team finished reviewing your model this week. I want to move forward. Full first-year funding, with a commitment to years 2 and 3 pending outcomes. I want you leading the program design. He paused. If you're willing. Diane stared at him. Cole, it's a good model, he said simply. It deserves to exist, and those kids deserve what you built for them. Something moved across his face, quiet and certain and wholly sincere. So do you. The tears came then, and she didn't fight them. Across the table, Cole Whitfield, who had almost taken one more step backward on the most important night of his life, watched Diane Carter cry the good kind of tears and felt something in him that had been closed for a very long time open up quietly, like a window. Outside the restaurant, Charleston moved through its evening. The same streets, the same harbour, the same beautiful, ordinary city, carrying without knowing it the weight of all the ordinary moments that were secretly extraordinary. A woman who had climbed into the mud so a child could live. A man who had stayed for 5 minutes when he almost hadn't. A little girl with pink beads in her hair and a cat named Biscuit, sleeping safely in her mother's arms. And the fragile, remarkable, entirely improbable thing that had grown between two people who had both almost not shown up. Here is our second question for you, and we really want to know. Has there ever been a moment in your life where showing up imperfectly, when everything had gone wrong, turned out to be the most important thing you ever did? Tell us your story in the comments below. This community was built on stories like yours, and we read every single one. If this story moved you, if Diane and Maya and this impossible evening stayed with you the way we hope it did, then you are exactly who this channel was made for. Subscribe to Souls and Heart Stories, where every week we bring you stories about people who choose courage over comfort, kindness over convenience, and love over the fear of getting it wrong. Hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and come back for more. We'll be here. We always show up. Souls and Heart Stories.